Directed to the government to repeal Section 230, which allows social media companies to violate our First Amendment. Thank you very much.
Let's go.
Based.
Let's go. So based.
This interesting clip from the Whatever podcast, which is huge on YouTube. It's this guy, Brian. It's a guilty pleasure watch of mine, I will admit. He brings on a bunch of modern women, like OnlyFans models or Instagram models, and then like trads, like socially conservative Christian influencers, puts them all around a big table and then discusses the most like controversial topics like trans, like abortion, like dating, like men and women. And the podcasts are like 5-hour marathon sessions. They get kind of crazy. But on the most recent one that they had, they were trying to discuss trans issues, and a certain very popular transgender influencer and the host, Brian, cut them off and said, we can't talk about this. We'll get demonetized. And so then it led to a conversation about social media and big tech censorship. Take a listen to this.
Yeah,
I wish your followers would direct.
I'm speaking with Rumble, so
that's cool.
Tell your followers they should direct their energy not towards Brian. It's not his fault that he has to censor himself so that he doesn't lose his business. Directed to the government to repeal Section 230, which allows social media companies to violate our First Amendment. Thank you very much.
Let's go.
Based.
Let's go. So based. Absolutely. Yeah. But
free Brian. Free my boy
Thank
Brian.
you.
Free Brian.
Hold on, guys. Hold on.
So there's a lot to unpack there. For context, Section 230 is a federal law that gives companies, tech platforms, and other companies liability protection so they can't be sued for what other people post on their platforms. If I tweet something, I'm responsible for the content. Twitter is not, because it's totally unworkable if they were potentially could be sued over every millions of tweets that are posted every day. Same with YouTube, for example. But she says, and this is a widely popular, I think, mistaken view and perception, that it lets companies violate people's First Amendment rights. You don't have a First Amendment right to post to a private platform. So just to start there, that's wrong.
Yeah, that was a giant yikes. I was cracking up, though, that virtually everybody else at the table looked completely confused. Like, what is Section 230? But she was on a rampage, and the guy snapping next to her. I mean, oh my gosh, the number of people who just spout off without doing the bare minimum of research. Section 230, like you said, it basically, and it's not just for tech platforms. This is widely misunderstood. It's for our website. If somebody were to come and leave a comment on base-politics.com, it's for virtually anybody who has any kind of property online to say what is already true in the real world. If you go in Burger King and start yelling obscenities and death threats, Burger King is not liable for somebody who might be harmed or offended by what you say. And so we have this law, just to reiterate, that the First Amendment still applies to the internet. Without it, you likely still would not see these lawsuits against companies succeed, right? If you were to write something crazy on Twitter and somebody tried to sue Twitter for it, probably it would eventually get thrown out. But the problem is the amount of money it would take for the company to defend itself, the amount of time it would take in the courts. It would completely wreck our system to get rid of Section 230. And people have all kinds of misguided ideas on it. It is nothing more simple than that. You're responsible for what you say, not for what other people say. The fact that YouTube can demonetize you is their First Amendment right. That means they don't have to promote views or pay you for views that they don't want to be associated with on their platform. You don't have a right to their property. And so if you want to use it,
crappy or unfair the way they choose to enforce that sometimes, but you're right.
But I mean, you don't have to like YouTube's virtues or their principles or how they choose to allocate their free speech rights. I often don't for many platforms, but it is still their right. Free speech doesn't mean you have the right to make people listen to you. It doesn't mean you have the right to compel others to host your speech or platform your speech. So she's completely off base here and actually has a very anti-free speech stance as a whole.
Also, if they did repeal Section 230, what's ironic is the Whatever podcast could not exist. YouTube would have to pre-screen every video, and the Whatever podcast is streamed live and makes most of its money from super chats, people paying to have their chats read on the show and discussed, their questions, their comments, their feedback, their roasts. You wouldn't be able to stream live on YouTube if Section 230 was repealed, because they would need to pre-screen all content, which first off, they couldn't do. There's way too much of it. So they'd have to probably just restrict YouTube to like companies that they can work with, like Disney's allowed to upload or HBO's allowed to upload. And then they would have to, maybe companies like Daily Wire or but then they would have to pre-screen every video, get it approved by their legal department so they're not exposing themselves to possible lawsuits. So getting rid of Section 230 would lead to more censorship on these platforms, not less. If they're suddenly possibly responsible for everything people might say on their platform, they're going to have to engage in a lot more content moderation, not less. So I am sympathetic, especially as somebody who's been banned by tech platforms unfairly, to the frustration that people have with these platforms and the inconsistency and the bias and all of the enforcement issues. But the idea that you would get rid of Section 230 to own the companies, it strikes me as both misguided in principle, but also just incredibly short-sighted and almost guaranteed to be a massive self-owned.
Yeah, and this is why people who don't know what they're talking about should stay out of public policy, because you're often arguing for your own demise. This would ruin the internet if you got rid of Section 230, or even if you tweaked it. There's no positive to this. It's known as the law that built the internet. It's one thing I think government actually got incredibly right. It was a bipartisan law passed in the 1990s when the internet was first coming about in order to protect free speech and to protect the free market online. It has worked amazingly. If you look at the explosion of the internet, and particularly at the explosion of the tech sector in the US, our GDP dwarfs that of other countries. And it is because we have better laws and protections for the market and for free speech versus places like England or other places in Europe where you can't even, it's not even comparable. These companies don't operate there and they lose out as a whole in their economy because of that. So I love Section 230, and while I have some issues with the moderation choices of companies, I still defend their right to do it. I will do it even if it's harmful to me, because I believe in free speech. I believe in a free market. I genuinely mean that. And as a whole, these things do not end up being more harmful than helpful to me, because as a content creator, I wouldn't have the ability to put the vast majority of content out that I do without these platforms, without Section 230.